what I plan to talk in the keynote was my view of economists' role in climate change policy. And I'll just say from the onset that I got into academia and economics so that I could have an influence on policy. That's what I believe is my main mission in life. And I try to always write papers that have a policy influence. And I speak with policymakers quite often. So I work a lot with, these days, over the last 2 years, I've been working a lot with state representatives and state policymakers. But we also at MIT often bring in federal policymakers from DC as well. So again, I think this is the most important role economists can play in this arena is to actually do work that influences policy. So I had 5 points. I'm gonna probably just touch on the first 3 and skip the last 2. But my first point is, so again, I'm coming at this as what should the economist's role be in climate change policy? And the one thing I want to highlight is if you're following the US climate change policy, that there's a lot going on. It's certainly at the state level, obviously, but a number of states and a number of utilities and a number of cities are setting some pretty ambitious goals, often 100% renewables or 100% clean energy by some date, often 2040 or 2050. So even right now, we have 11% of US electricity and 5% of emissions are under one of these very strong goals. And if you count up everybody that's committed, we're starting to get close to a half of the electrons being clean energy by 2050 or very clean. If you look at the map, the one thing that I often talk with students and Massachusetts policymakers is a lot of the carbon policy isn't necessarily in what we call blue states, democratic states. That you're seeing a lot of heavy action operating even in red states. And that's certainly exciting, an exciting development. But one thing I think economists can add to this arena is what is the right goal? And I'm going to explain why I think this is important in a second. But recent work at MIT, we came out with the future of the nuclear study, and hidden in the 400 pages of the study is this one table. And this table plots basically the marginal abatement cost curve. So what does it cost to get rid of carbon on a per ton basis at different levels of abatement, right? So the typical electricity market in the US is at about 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So you can sort of go from there. If we're going to get all the way to 100% clean energy, then we're at that bottom row. If we're at 80%, we're somewhere in between the third to the bottom and the second to bottom. So I just want to highlight that the marginal cost of abatement gets really, really steep, right? It gets really expensive to reduce carbon from 90% to 100%. So this study was showing the virtues of nuclear in a decarbonized world. So they had different scenarios for the cost of nuclear. But if you just look at nuclear nominal costs there, you'll see that the marginal cost of abating to 100% is about $2,000 a ton. Now that's very expensive. I don't know what your favorite social cost of carbon is, but mine probably isn't up to 2,000. So what that says is going from 80% to 90%, and certainly from 90 to 100%, is likely welfare reducing. We're spending $2,000 for something we value at less than $2,000. And I think that's important, that economists sort of rein in some of this excitement about these decarbonized goals. Now, there's a couple counterpoints to this. One is you could say, well, these aren't really goals, they're just aspirations, and nobody really thinks we're going to meet them. And once we get close, or once we start going up the marginal abatement cost curve, we'll change the goals. That's exactly how you don't write policy, right? You don't write policy in a way where you know you're not going to hit your targets, because then firms don't invest in hitting the targets. If they know that you're willing to back away from your target, then they're not going to do any of the R&D in the first place. And I think we've seen that in many, especially in transportation, where you might face deep cellulosic ethanol goals, but nobody ever thought we would hit those. So no firms ever invested in cellulosic ethanol because they actually wanted to raise the cost of cellulosic ethanol so that the policymakers would actually rescind the goals. And I'm worried we're traveling down that path right now. Now you could also say, well, as long as we get close and start down the path, maybe later on we adjust the path as well. There's another cost to doing that other than the credibility of policy making, and that is that you might invest in a bunch of stuff because you think you're going to get to 100% clean energy, and then the policymakers pull the rug from under you and you only get 80% and you have all these sunk assets. Right? You invested in things that helped you get to 100% but weren't needed to get to 80%. And so that increases the cost of doing that. And I won't go through all of this, but this is coming from a few researchers at MIT that shows that if you want to get to 80%, in this case, you do a lot of wind. But if you want to get to 100%, you don't do a lot of wind. So if we're marching down to, we think it's going to be 100%, we're going to make a bunch of different investments than if the ultimate goal was actually 80%. Right? So I think it's very important for policymakers and for economists to help policymakers to set realistic goals to increase the credibility of those goals and to reduce the likelihood of sunk assets and sunk costs. And then finally, as you might expect, 100% clean energy leads to very expensive electricity rates. Now, Germans appear to be willing to pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour, but I guarantee you Texans aren't willing to pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour, right? And I think we could convert the yellow vest movement to the leather vest movement very quickly, right? Okay, so a couple other points. The other point, and I'll just quickly go by this, the other thing that economists can help in this regard is that the right goal depends on transmission and the ability to move electrons from one place to the other. And in the US at least, we're really bad at siting transmission lines. My colleague Paul Joskow likes to say that the transmission line is the perfect type of investment to make it impossible to site, and that's that they're long and skinny. And the fact that they're long and skinny means they go through lots of different jurisdictions, and you need buy-in from each of those jurisdictions. So one thing that economists can really help on the policy front is helping to design ways to site transmission and to site on the electricity side and potentially on the natural gas side. Okay, now I'm going to get to what I thought was going to be provocative, but I think Mark hit a lot of these points as well. And I'm actually frustrated by economists' sudden love for second and third best policies. And the argument often goes, and I'm not putting words in Mark's mouth because I wasn't at his talk, but the argument that I often hear is that, okay, carbon taxes are not politically viable, some other policy is politically viable, and the subtext of that is always because it hides costs. Because these second and third best policies, the only thing they bring to the table is that they're good at hiding their costs, okay? You can say that they lead to different distributional effects, but that can't be true because a carbon tax generates money. And you could always mimic the distributional effects of any renewable portfolio standard, any low carbon fuel standard. You could always use the money in a way that mimics those distributional effects. So the only benefit is that they hide their costs, okay? So then the third point is, given that, economists should do more to support or advocate for these second and third best policies. I actually disagree with that, okay? And for a few reasons. One is, we're not policymakers. I don't know what's politically feasible. I had no idea that the US would be taxing Canadian steel 2 years ago. I had no idea that was feasible. If you said, what are the odds of that, I would have said 0. I had no idea Donald Trump would be president of the United States, right? So that's not our comparative advantage, predicting which policies are feasible or not. But the second and more important thing is, let's realize what we're saying. What we're saying when the argument is that we should advocate for a policy because it hides costs, what we're really saying is we should advocate this policy because it fools voters, okay? What is hiding costs other than fooling voters, right? Now, I actually feel very strongly that that is not something the profession should advocate for. I had a colleague who said one of the reasons why Obamacare was put in place is because it was fooling voters, and he rightly so got in trouble for that from the popular press. We had Fox News cameras following, I won't name his name, I'm sure you could backtrack who that is, but we had Fox News camera crews following him around all over campus. I actually agree that that's not something that the profession should advocate for, fooling voters, okay? I believe hiding costs is a cost, not a benefit, right? Because, again, I think we should be more transparent. So now the rebuttal to this point, which I already sort of mimicked, is that, well, maybe these policies are good on some other metric, something like distributional grounds. But I think this ignores the fact that you could always replicate any distributional effects using the carbon tax revenue. And in fact, a recent paper by Hofstad and Williams, nice paper in the JPOB, showed that actually carbon taxes are progressive even if you ignore how we distribute the money, because low-income consumers get other federal subsidies that would overcome the burden of the carbon taxes. So again, if it's distributional grounds, and I work a lot with state senators in Massachusetts, where they rightly so worry about how a carbon tax is going to affect their voters. And one thing that I've helped them design is a carbon tax that adjusts how the revenue streams go to certain locations based on the average people in that population. For example, Senator Mike Barrett has a carbon tax that passed the House last year unanimously within Massachusetts that gave the dividends back in a way that was linked to your average commute and your average fuel economy of vehicles in the county. So there are ways to adjust how revenues are given back to mimic and to overcome some of these distributional grounds. And then the other thing I want to say is, look, I'm not fighting, so I don't want to sit here and say that I'm against second and third best policies. If a policy is welfare enhancing, I'm in favor of it. Okay, so if the second best policy improves welfare and you take the first best policy off the table, then I'm in favor of the second best policy being adopted. Okay, but I don't think economists should give up on the fact that the first best policy, we should always remind policymakers of the first best policy and show them the relative costs of these different policies. Here's some data that I think Mark might have mentioned something to this effect. If you go to California right now that has a cap and trade program, permits are trading at about $15 a ton. If you go to California also that has a low carbon fuel standard trading, you can buy and sell permits under the low carbon fuel standard that are delineated by dollars per ton of abatement. Those permits are trading at $200 a ton. So the marginal cost under the low carbon fuel standard of reducing carbon is 10 times that under the carbon tax. You cannot tell me a carbon tax or a cap and trade is politically infeasible because California has it, right? So now we're at the point where we're actually just, can we shift policymakers' attention from this low carbon fuel standard to rely more on the cap and trade program instead? And I actually think we can. Okay, if you educate policymakers and you educate voters and say, look, the social cost of the low carbon fuel standard is 10 times that of the cap and trade policy, I might be naive, but I actually think facts matter. And I actually think that we can have an influence, certainly on the margin with policymakers. And another point is that a lot of people and policymakers incorrectly view these second, third best policies like the low carbon fuel standard as free, as not costly. And again, that's their advantage. They hide those costs, and they hide them so well, many people often believe that they're actually free. And this actually happened, so I'm not on Twitter very much. I think I have 11 followers. 9 of them might be in this room. But there was recently a Twitter battle about renewable portfolio standards because of a recent paper out of Chicago showing, or at least suggesting, that low carbon fuel standards raise electricity prices. And that seem to be controversial, that they actually raise electricity prices. Again, that's the advantage of the policy, that it hides those costs. But basic economics tells us it's going to raise electricity prices. So among my 11 followers, I did a little poll that asked what you think 7 years from now a renewable portfolio standard would do to electricity prices. And 26% of those 11 followers believe it's free or actually negative costs. That's bad, right? Again, you might think that's good because that allows us to pass these things, which might be true, but my counterpoints to that is I don't think we should be in the business of fooling voters again. And second, I actually think years down the road, this is going to create ill will towards carbon policy. So maybe it's beneficial in the short run because we could do something, but by the time we try to get to 70s, 80, 90% decarbonization, people are going to be fed up with these very costly policies because you fooled them. And I actually think that's what the Yellow Vest movement is all about as well. It's not about carbon taxes. It's about all the other stuff that France is already doing that's very, very expensive. And Gib Metcalf from Tufts has a nice op-ed that suggests the same thing. So we need to have the long-term view here and not just be myopic in the sense of what can we do to pass something now. We need to realize that we need to put in place a set of policies and a set of regulations that will live a long time and actually see it through to total decarbonization. So what do I believe our role is as economists? So I don't think we should be pushing any policy at all. I think we should push efficiency as much as we can, but I view my job as writing papers that calculates the costs and benefits of different policies, giving those to policymakers and letting them choose from there. And then once they adopt a policy, we keep them honest, right? What's keeping them honest? There's tons and tons of papers that show how expensive CAFE standards are, or the Chicago paper that shows that the renewable portfolio standard is expensive. I think that's our job so that we can, as much as possible, push policymakers toward efficiency for long-term benefits, okay? Let's see if I should skip this one. Yeah, let me just get to my final 3 points really quickly. The other thing that I think is a personal mission of mine is about incidence and how different policies affect different socioeconomic groups. I've been becoming more and more frustrated. Again, the millennials would say that I was triggered, but that a lot of the policies that we are adopting are very, very bad for low-income consumers. And if you look at the alternatives to a carbon tax, whether it's EV subsidies or solar subsidies or renewable portfolio standards, a lot of that money is flowing to very wealthy people. And it's sort of dated now, and I'd love to see this updated, but Severin Bornstein, my thesis advisor, and Lucas Davis have a really nice paper that just tracks where the money goes under federal subsidy programs, whether they're the residential energy credits, which are subsidizing solar panels, or EV subsidies. So what this graph is showing is the dark line there is showing you the percentage of the subsidies that are going to income groups at or below the horizontal axis. So to read this, if you go to 80%, so of the bottom 80% of taxpayers in the US, they get about 40% of clean energy subsidies, okay? The corollary of that is the top 20% is getting 60% of the subsidies, okay? The top 10% of taxpayers is getting about 30% of subsidies for solar panels. It's even worse for cars, electric vehicles. Again, up to their data set, which was up to 2012. That may be changing now, but if you look at the right panel, that's the top 10% of US taxpayers are getting 60% of the subsidies for electric vehicles, okay? It's politically feasible, sure, okay? Whether it's fooling voters, I don't know, but it's politically feasible. But is that long run sustainable? I don't think so. I think these sorts of graphs create the yellow vest movement, where all the money is going to wealthy people, and we're ignoring the bottom income earners. Okay, so this is some of my own work that looked at the renewable fuel standard, and what the darker the color, the more money is going to that county. So why do we have the renewable fuel standard? I would say because there's a ton of money that gets ported to middle America. In particular, there's a county in Iowa that, because of the renewable fuel standard, makes $6,000 a person a year under the renewable fuel standard. Iowa, as you know, in the US, has a very strong political power because of the voting system. Again, that's politically feasible. Is that long run sustainable? I'm not sure. We're already seeing backlash against policies like the renewable fuel standard. Final point, really quickly, is about rate design, electricity rate design. And this is something that MIT is doing a lot of work on. And that is the way we price electricity for the last 100 years just won't work anymore. And what in particular? So historically, the way we paid for transmission and distribution is through volumetric charges, a per kilowatt charge. And that's worked historically as a way to redistribute money from wealthy to poor, because on average, the wealthy consume more electricity. So they're paying more of their quote unquote fair share for the transmission distribution network, which is largely a fixed cost. But going forward, that's not the case anymore. Why? Because you could partially cut the cord and get out of your transmission distribution contributions by putting solar panels on your roof. And who's putting solar panels on their roofs? Wealthy people. So what we're seeing now is this vicious cycle where we subsidize solar, okay? I already showed you most of that money goes toward wealthy people. The wealthy people get the subsidies, then they don't pay for transmission and distribution anymore. Those are fixed costs. They have to be paid by somebody. So what do? You increase the volumetric charge. Well, what does that do? That puts more of the burden on low-income consumers. So not only are the low-income consumers not getting the subsidies, they're actually paying more for transmission and distribution because the wealthy people are getting the subsidies. At some point, this is going to blow up, right? So we need to rethink how we pay for transmission and distribution. And MIT is doing a fair bit of that work, and some of my students are doing this work. This splits things up by the horizontal axis is the share of households that have photovoltaics, and this is the change in your bill under volumetric charges for transmission and distribution. And you could see the bottom quintiles, the bottom 40%, they pay more on average as we get more and more solar, because they're not getting the solar and they're getting stuck with the transmission distribution costs. And at 75%, this is real money, over $200 a year in changes in expenditures. So again, I think this is a very important topic that regulators need to be cognizant of. Okay, so wrapping up, I think economists play a critical role in climate change policy. I think we can help policymakers get the right goals and set credible policies that actually lead to the right amount of R&D, because R&D is going to be important in this space. And if we start setting incredible policies, we're going to be like cellulosic ethanol, where no firm invests in cellulosic ethanol because they know the targets don't mean anything. So we need to set targets that actually we can stick by and credibly commit to. And I actually think we should continue to write papers that focus on efficiency, and wherever possible, help policymakers choose among the set of policies that are welfare enhancing, but also move them toward efficiency and toward worrying about efficiency, because my own view is that hiding costs is a cost and not a benefit of policies. So with that, I'll stop. Thanks a lot.
First of all, let me thank the organizer for inviting me here. And Montreal is a lucky place for me. And I used to come here quite often, 2003, 2004, 2005, I was commissioned by the NAFTA Secretariat on Environmental Corporations. We did a number of studies. Until now, I'm still remember, and sometimes I still signed it. One is I did one look at how Canada comply with climate regulation when U.S. withdraw protocol. And the second study we do, I still remember, is so-called double standards. It's a multinational corporation. When investment in Mexico, you find that even they have high standard, technical standard, when they investment in Mexico, they will lower standards and trying to earn the cost benefits and the competitiveness. So this we were done the 2003, 2005 in the Montreal we did for NAFTA Corporation. Today I will take the opportunity to share some of my thoughts about the energy transition in China. And I particular, when you talk about energy transition, there are many ways to define. For here, I will really trying to say we're trying to reduce more fossil fuel use, particular is coal, and meantime trying to use more renewable energies. And particularly, we will look at some market instrument, particularly here in the price reform. Because in China, there are so many energy environment issues, so we're not particular just targeting on climate change, although that was I'm working on almost over 30 years. Let me first show you a couple of pictures. And this is basically to show that what is addition for the renewables. And we do see that over the last few years, actually, the renewable incremental increased substantially until recent 2 years. And then last year, we do see that the incremental renewable energy globally actually is have similar level as 2017. It's only have about 180 gigawatt increase. This is far, far less than minimum required 300 gigawatt, which is required to achieve the 2-degree target for the Paris Agreement. And this is significantly slowed down partially because in China we do see that the renewable emission is go down significantly, and this is we still be able to have similar level as last year, partially because in some other regions they increase their level of the penetration in the renewables. And particularly look at the energy mix, we do see that over last 80 years, there's a significant increase in terms of energy mix structure in China. The coal share or total drop from the below the 70s to below the 60s. And this is a significant progress, partially was because of renewable. I guess it's also significantly increased because of the natural gas and oil. So that reason, when you look at the energy transitions, we not only have to look at not only target on renewable, but also other more cleaner fossil fuel like gas and oil also be very crucial. And for that reason, and here I would like to share some part and how that could happen and what are the policy which is still crucial. And here, this is a social country. In many cases, we will meet targets. They always have some kind of flagship initiative, and this is, and also there are some more and more use more market instrument and trying to get energy price right from the whole value chain and natural resources from upstream and in use stage energy price, then the end stage and through the market instrument like carbon trading, which actually took place in several pilot cities, but also because the whole country which are still in the transition, still in the improve the economic structures, it means some general industrial policies and also supporting economic policy, which are also very crucial. And sometimes this industrial policy also leads to debate between the US and China. That was what happened in the trade war. But today I will mainly focus on the energy price, which is probably more relevant to the whole discussions. And when you come to energy and the coal is the dominant fossil fuel, that reason the coal price is always crucial. And since 1993, country already have liberalized price for the coal, which are using for no utilities, but for coal used for utility, which price still regulated by the government, and until 2003, this will also be liberalized. Then the question is, electricity tariff is regulated by government, but the coal price are liberalized. You find more and more utility very hard to get the coal because the coal miner doesn't want to sell to them, and then they have government have this so-called coal movement. Means if the coal price increase certain levels, then we will change the electricity tariff. And although this is a general rule, but in reality, they don't hardly have adjustment to that. So that reason this market mechanism is not really, pricing mechanism is not automatically. And then we also have the petroleum, and is a oil price, which basically international price, but the product price still regulated. And recent mechanism is basically means if a price products which are over the 10 working days have a certain percent increase, then we'll make adjustment. But if the oil price, which is below the $40 per barrel, there will be no change, partially because the countries that already have import more than 70% of oil from abroad, they're trying to reduce this oil independence, partly also because a lot of domestic production from oil well in the Daqing, in some other place, already more than $50 per barrel. So that reason they also want to help the domestic production. And for electricity, this is, I would say in China, for the whole energy sector, which are most regulated by government. Until recently, they had a change about how to determine tariff. And basically, before, means utility, they buy electricity from the power plant and then sell to consumer, and they just charge as much you want. But now, government set the charge more or less like a bank that you can charge the transmission and distribution fees. Later I will mention what is the implication for this, because certainly you more and more look like what the European and the American doing, but in reality, when you put this in operation, you still have a significant practical issues should be solved. Then come to the renewable. Yes, renewable in China developed fast, and I guess partly because initially we started this so-called this bidding mechanism. So it doesn't matter you are private company, you are state-owned company, as long as you are bidding for this open call and you give the low price, you get it, and then you find the rapid development. Then later on, the government also see there are some problems, then we start using called feed-in tariff, so they divide the country into several regions as a reference price, and then we will be more regulated on the issues. And later on, then you find overcapacities. Nowadays, and I guess from last year, we still use these reference prices, but meantime, we'll combine with the bidding price. That means the bidding price will be lower than the reference price, trying to reduce the overcapacities. So this is a general energy price issues. But anyhow, if you get this thing to be really effective, we really have so many fundamental issues. Here, I'd like to mention a couple of them. One is about the energy price elasticities. One is when you, anytime you are trying to adjust the energy price, you always raise this issue of so-called inflation concerns. I will, to look at this. And another one is, nowadays there are significant oversupply, overcapacity of the wind installation and the solars. How to address the wind and the solar curtailment. I will go through some of them. I mean, the energy price list, because nowadays when you are trying to look at the analysis and trying to look at the price effect, always this price elasticity should be very crucial. We all do the modeling, but many times we just assume this is given, but in reality, this is not really not the cases. And we just look at the particular look at the tier price in the electricity use in the household. We do find that the price elasticity, which is more or less unity, but increasing with income. So this gives impression that this kind of tier price can be used for target on the high income group. And also this morning we see the first speaker to discuss and significant reduction on the carbon. But the point is, if you have such big reduction in carbon, to some extent also lead to the question whether this price elasticity should change, right? Because otherwise this is also maybe your assumption result also maybe overestimating the emission. We also look at in the similar cases in China cases, because in the transition, then you find is indeed in the this price elasticity instead of exogenous, which model usually assume, but actually it's very endogenous. And with economic transition, we do find that empirically find this price elasticity increasing over time. Yeah, so that means with economic transition and then is substitution between the energy as input with other factor production actually is much more. So that is how the high income, high energy price like this is. Another thing is about the so-called concern about the inflation effect and trying to make reduce the government concern. We did a study compare United States and China. We all know that the U.S. is purely market economics. So if we look at the exactly cases, if both countries double oil price per barrel, then you see what impact on the consumer price. We did the global model, actually find that even you double price on the oil price, you find the U.S. consumer price probably only slightly increased 1 or 2%. In China cases, because you are also certainly is more and more shifting from the market-oriented to, from a central plan to more economics, but no one would think China was more market-oriented than the United States. So in that sense, you have a lot of the transaction restriction from upstream to downstream. So that reason, if you double the oil price from upstream levels, you wouldn't see there is much big impact. So from this comparison study, we do find sometimes this kind of inflation concern overreact. Yeah, this is based on the empirical model. Another thing I like to emphasize here is about the so-called overcapacity on the wind. In addition, that you cause the wind curtailment, and you do find that on the left hand is red bar, which you do see how the wind curtailment which are cut, although the recent few years are getting better. And then right the panel to show by province, you do see that in some province, which is curtailment is still very, very high. So then the risk question, why this cost? And sometimes, in the U.S. cases, we have federal government, there's a clean definition what is responsibility between the federal and the state government. In China cases, this kind of thing is not so clear. So many policies which are formulated in the central government level, but they actually have been implemented in the local levels. This kind of coordination is not well formulated, or at least is not really done in the beginning. You end up with many times you have a good initiative in the central government level, but in the end up with not a really positive effect overall. And similar, particularly when you come to this, either for those days, the overcapacity for the coal miner, either is overcapacity in the solar and the wind, which is mainly because of bad coordinations. And then have this, given this, and you have this overcapacity, of course, partially also because of technical reason, because there is a very significant percentage of inflexible coal-fired generating unit, very, very difficult to make adjustment. Some also related to so-called this equal share dispatch, and this is also different from US, Europe, and in China cases, doesn't matter about the marginal cost, really depends as long as the same type of the power and it will be used in the same percentage. And so that reason, even you renewable have zero marginal cost, but you still put in the backyard before they have a certain percent coal-fired use have used. And so this is the technical reasons. And to trying to increase more and more renewable use, the government from the May of this year, we implemented called renewable sourcing mandate by region. And we don't call renewable portfolio standards. And that was the US and Europe doing. Reason in China is the government thought that in China we are not, because we not like EU and US, maybe you have less sufficient supply of renewables. Then use this standard, try to have more use, trying to reduce cost. In China cases, we have sufficient supply there, and we need to help how to get it used. So that reason they particularly don't call this renewable portfolio standard. They call it renewable absorption mandate, and also define this by region, and also particularly defined by the some are mandated for hydro, some are no hydros. So this will be defined by 31 province. And I can say this is a big increase, a big progress in terms of help to solve these issues. But I would say is in the reality, probably still will be difficulty because it's for local each province. And if you want them to use more renewable, certainly they might be cut their coal-fired use. And some province and certainly was not that intensified because for the coal-fired power, it would be easier for them because they increase the prosperity, increase the production, increase the GDPs. So I would say that here there are some kind of the incentive missing that I call is instead of always trying to help the production side, we might maybe need some policy trying to put some incentive for absorbing regions. So that means might be some kind of subsidies, I don't know how to call it, help to consumption. So this might be the way also complement with what the government doing to try to solve these curtailment issues. And last point I like to make is about, when you want to reduce your fossil fuels, trying to increase your renewables, and some kind of regional coordination action also important. You probably know that in China in recent few years, there were nationwide hazard, and particularly started with Beijing. And so then Beijing take very aggressive action trying to reduce the coal use. And of course, the government have this policy, but never done really the cost-benefit analysis. Some study we done with Toulouse School of Economics. Actually, we found that if you this policy, if for the coal substitution, gas substitution for coal, if for power generation, you end up with a negative benefit cost. And of course, it's more positive if you are substitute for household. So then this question is whether this option really is good if you take the little bit broad perspective, because other regions in China also want to use more gas rather than coals, but you end up there is less sufficient gas for use, and they have to use the coals. Particularly in Beijing, we all know that in China cases, when think about the issues, always take the Beijing and Shanghai as centers, and you see the Olympic game and the Olympic game. And it happened, they ask the neighborhood to cut their productions and have a clean earth. But this is in a way thinking. But my point here, I like to stress that actually there's other way to solve these issues. It means if the, air pollution in Beijing, 1/3 we should attribute by neighbor province, and substitution coal for gas, which particular power even negative. Why don't you let this kind of coal gas used for the neighbor province like Hebei? In the end, will be more cost-effective than we end up more clean areas for the whole regions. And then this is risk issues. How do you get the region cooperate with each other? Because in China, we don't always have central government as in the lead. Then hardly to see the local government which we can do. So here I particularly mention a mechanism which might be can complement with this, which I call usually in the environmental textbook, we always have the mechanism called the pollution pay principles. Who pollute, who will pay for that. But actually there is some mechanism which not really people reckon here that much, is called the victim pay principle. That is typically cases, like Germany and France and Germany from Holland. We have the Rhine rivers, and upstream that Germany was heavily polluted, then the Dutch and French, which and downstream, and pay for German, let them have less dirty water be emitted into water, help them. And if you take this as a victim principle, then I would say that number of years in China have a very big sandstorm. Basically, it means desert. This sand which from the Gobi desert then flow to Beijing, then we come down to the South Korea, to the Japan. And in the end, this mechanism also work. Korea and Japan paid some for China to planting trees, and this issue get solved. I will take if we take this as a kind of a concrete example, then I would say if Beijing and Hebei, for example, if they can collaborate with each other, and then Beijing will pay for Hebei, and not like a specific project. I mean, basically in the government level, if we really have the financial transfer, that's money we can use for Hebei overall, then I would say it will be much better to help the local pollution. This is also a way to improve the pollutions and also help the energy structures. And with time going faster, I just end up one thing about electricity, which I said is nowadays we have the new mechanism and grid, never like a bank. You just charge you have a deposit, and then you have the loan, you charge this rate. This is not anymore, and now government designed you have to charge the flat rate by the transition and the distribution fees. Then this point is, if the grid only charges the flat rate, the question is if the buyer and the seller, if they agree on the deals, then for the grid, they only have the flat fee. Why? What incentive and what the big deal if you sign on the buy side have a different price? So this is really make a difference. Another thing is about we also trying to encourage them to use renewable. So what care for them? So there's no difference for them. And another thing is that in China, any segment in the society all set the electricity price higher. So that means government want to say, we have to cut the price, cut the electricity tariff. But that means for the grid, which is rated flat, and the consumers think higher, and the producers think cost higher, then where the price can be go down. So this is really issue that we have to address. And so let me stop here because time limitation. I will not bother your time, and then we can take some things for discussions. Thank you.
As I was listening to the previous speakers, I was asking myself, okay, where do I stand in all that? And I guess I'm the one who has to do the sales pitch based on your data, because I'm like the ham and the sandwich between you guys providing the info and the right data and the politicians with whom I have to convince that where we want to go is the right place to go, and we have to find the right words to convince them to move ahead. And I will add one little thing before my presentation. Mr. Knittel, you were talking about first choice, second, and third. I'm a great supporter of the first choice. Even though if it's a harder sale, we have to go with that one and keep the two others in our pocket if something goes wrong. Of course, if we compare what we heard with what I will be talking about, we are obviously in a different world here in Quebec, and a little bit of context piece so that you understand why and how we have shaped our public policies the way we did. We have a goal. It's an ambitious goal. We have other goals, but we will start with this one, which has to do with GHG reduction. So you see the number on the screen. Transportation is the largest GHG emitter, so we have to focus on transportation. Quebec hydroelectricity, of course, is an asset that we have. We have clean energy, reliable distribution grid, and I will add to that also cheap energy, which is significant when it comes time to shape our public policy. And I would add one other piece of context when it comes to Quebec, and that will explain also why we have been successful in get support with our carbon tax system, the cap and trade system. So we used to say in Quebec that we had two national sports. The first one was hockey. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but the second one remains is consultation. We are expert in public consultation on different kind of subject. And sometimes I make fun of that, but when you look back and you look forward, I think the time that we put in this province in making sure that we build good support through discussion, communication, consultation done with respect, with transparency, it pays off. So as economists, these are kind of information that sometimes we would like to have more. What is the price of getting involved early on in the process and see what is the positive impact at the end of the day? So this is our context piece. A little bit of information about where we come from. We have established what we call the Green Fund in 2006. This is, in simple terms, our bank where we borrow money to implement our public policy. So that's one simple way to look at it. We have also developed different strategies, action plan, master plan, to make sure that we know where we're going. It's not perfect, but we have a destination most of the time. So we started with the Climate Change Action Plan. We have had another one since then. The energy strategy, we had a second one after 2015 that take us to 2030. Another action plan, as I mentioned, on climate change. And we have different kind of strategy plan. An example of that is the one on electric vehicles. So how does that work in Quebec? I thought it was useful for you to understand the ecosystem and where we come from. So you can see at the beginning here that we have this cap-and-trade system that we established a couple years ago. The money comes mainly by the big emitters of CO2 in the province. You heard quite a bit about California, but for those of you who are not from North America, keep in mind that when you hear about the cap-and-trade system in California, it's a joint cap-and-trade system with Quebec. So we work together in that cap-and-trade system. There was a time where we were supposed also to have Ontario on board, but the landscape have changed there quite a bit over the last year. So the money that we get from the cap-and-trade system goes into our bank, which is the Green Fund. Then, through our action plans and policies, we make sure that the money that is given to us by the Green Fund will serve to achieve our targets. So, for example, we, Transition énergétique Québec, I will use the acronym TEC as of now, we will get money from the Green Fund if we are able to design programs that will help reduce greenhouse gas reduction. Because the Green Fund is a dedicated fund. It cannot be used for any other purposes than GHG reduction. So this money is taken and given to different organizations, but mostly government departments, to implement their programs. Those programs are the outcome, so to speak, of the public policies that we have in Quebec. You have the Plan d'Action Changement Climatique, so that was what I was referring to. And a year ago, the government, and it was one of the reasons why TEC was created, the government asked us to design a master plan so that we can achieve the goal of the new energy policy in Quebec. I will get back to that later. What is important to know is that the money that we use to fund programs is returned as up to 90% to Quebecers through industry, through public individual citizen, and also to institutions. So the money that we collect, and it's not only from the cap-and-trade system, there's a portion that comes from a carbon tax at the fuel station. And this overall pot of money is 2/3 dedicated to public transit, and the last third is dedicated to all other kind of measures that will help to achieve our GHG emission goal. So we return the money. We ourselves, we run 8 programs. 4 of these programs contribute to 60% of the GHG reduction in Quebec. And I will get a little bit more in the detail of what kind of program we have built to achieve our public policies. So what are the goals of the Energy Policy 2030? I will just focus on a key element, energy efficiency. When I got into this business of energy, because before that I was in environment, I found very rapidly that the biggest hard sell is to sell energy efficiency. It's not sexy, it doesn't mean anything, but when you look, especially for economists, at it from the point that it's a kind of no-cost, energy at no cost that is given to us to do other things to achieve public policies, it's really important to find the words to explain to people that it is you, me, and everybody who can contribute to bring this energy to us so that we can use for other purposes. 15%, it's huge in terms of achievement. It's difficult, but we hope that by 2030 we will be able to get there. Reduction of petroleum product, we're talking about 50%. Keep in mind that one of our key areas to reduce GHG is transportation, so we have to really focus, and the options are not that numerous. And you will see that we have program also which will address the industry sector. When we think about residential, we have almost achieved the conversion. So there's no real gain to compare to many other countries to invest a lot in conversion in the residential and commercial area because mostly we are all hydro. Increase renewable energy. You were talking earlier about investing in solar. We have made the decision in Quebec that we will not invest in solar because for us it's like changing 4 quarters for $1. We are already hydro. So we try to focus renewable energy mainly up north when communities are off-grid. So we're talking about solar and wind farm, certainly, and we are starting to look at hydrogen to complement those two sources of energy. And bioenergy, which is key for us because when we'll have achieved some of our goals with respect to electrification of the economy, because this is where this government is leading. We will still have to need energy, and we think that to achieve our goals, especially the 40% in petroleum product, we will be able to do that with bioenergy. So we were asked we were the one holding the pen, but we were asked with all our partners within the government, outside the government, including the distributors, to design a master plan which will help us to achieve the energy policy. I'm no longer talking about GHG emission because we know that most of the reduction of GHG will come through energy. So focusing on energy, we will have collateral positive impact on GHG emission. But our goal is to focus on energy transition almost essentially. So we will have to come with five-year master plan, and there will be like 2.5 implemented by 2030 to achieve the policy goal. So right now, with what we have designed, we will be able to improve energy efficiency by 1.2% per year and reduce petroleum product consumption by 12%. The goal that was given to us was 1% energy efficiency and 5% reduction of petroleum product. So who we are, in fact, I will just say very rapidly that we have 3 main goals as a Crown Corporation. The first one, which has a lot to do with this conference, is to build the knowledge and keep the knowledge and share the knowledge and work for achieving that with our partners. And Cher and Olivier and Johanne and all that team are our first partner in building the knowledge. Our second task is to design programs and public policies to make sure that, first of all, we don't get into the yellow vest at some point. We have something that makes sense for everybody and that we can measure and report on achieving our goals. And the third one is to design, as I mentioned, the master plan. So knowledge, implementing programs, and developing the recipe, let's say it that way, to be able to achieve the policy goal. When it comes to the programs that we run, we have different programs. A good portion of them is to complete the conversion of energy to green energy. The other one is really to improve energy efficiency. And as we have built our vision for the future as an organization, we have said that it's energy efficiency first. You have to achieve energy efficiency goal before you even ask for money from us in any other aspect. So you have to demonstrate that whatever energy you will use, it will be an improvement in terms of energy efficiency. In the residential area, we have renovating program. We have Econology is for low income, and I agree with what also the previous speaker were mentioning. We have to keep in mind that we don't do that for the wealthy. We do that for every single citizen in the province, and we have to focus on that aspect too. Chauffe vert is conversion of heating system, and Nouveau Climat is the new regulation for new houses. So it has a lot to do with the new building code that we were working on to introduce energy efficiency, and at some point we would like to be able to have an energy quotation on houses. Commercial, institutional, it's a bigger program, but they reach also the same thing. Transportation, we are the one who are providing the rebate if you buy electric vehicles. We have revisited recently our approach. We are making sure that we are not there to give subsidies for those who want to buy new, fancy, high-end electric vehicle, but it's for the average people. And I must say that we are very proud that we have been able, over time, through our program, to our also awareness and promotion initiative, to move toward this major transition in the market. We are providing, and I can speak to that a little bit after the speech, my speech if you want to know more, but we have been able to transition, and at some point we will withdraw from the rebates because we have estimated that by 2023, 2025, electric vehicle will be mostly at the same price as a conventional one in the province. And at this stage, then we don't need to get involved as a government to change the market. The transition will have taken. And we support also innovation. We talk about a lot about data. It's important. I have to do the sales pitch. Lucky me if I'm able to get politician attention so that it becomes their own priorities. And how you measure that, it's very simple. You have to get the money that goes with whatever promises you're making to your constituent. And we have been able, as we were developing the master plan, which has 225 measures on 5 years, to secure $6 billion, which a good chunk will come from the Green Fund, and also to develop roadmaps to make sure that we deliver on promises. And I guess this is a comment that I would like to make. In my previous life, I was an auditor. This is, again, it's not something very sexy, but if I have learned something about auditing, is that you achieve what you measure. And if there's a lack in public policy, is really that nobody measures, nobody cares. We just go with the program, which is sexy, you advertise it, you get interested people to buy into it, to get involved. But at the end of the day, it's public money. You have to measure what is the outcome and if this is a good investment. So in our case, we are measuring every of our programs, and I will just speak for tech. So I can tell you, if you invest in this area, you have a cost of, let's say, $17 a ton of GHG reduction. In this area, it's 35, and then we have to evaluate our programs to make sure that we cannot even get better in doing so. The money we get, ourselves, and this year we're talking about a $600 million budget, comes in a good portion from the Green Fund. We also get money from the distributor of energy. That money can serve only on energy efficiency programs, so they are very focused also on an outcome. And we get finally money once in a while from the federal government. The area that we have targeted are the following one, and I will pass this one rapidly. Just want to leave you with this last picture. I was asking myself and my team as we were building the master plan, how can we make sure that we have a long-lasting life and that we will be seen as a fundamental in achieving energy transition in Quebec. And I have come with this approach, which is the roadmap, which are public and accessible to whomever would like to see what we are planning to do. So you have a team. Then you have the roadmap on this 5-year master plan, which all the concrete measure that we are supposed to achieve. Every time it was possible to do so, we have measured the cost and the outcome expected. And every year, we will come back with a report card on how we have been able to achieve. And my hope is that we can demonstrate to the government, if we want to continue to help Quebec moving toward energy transition, that every penny has a positive impact on what we do. And I've spent many years working with the government, and if there's one thing that I've learned, is that when you get to hard numbers and you can prove that what you're doing pays off, it's really hard to argue against. So thank you very much to continue to help us with your work, and enjoy your conference.
Please, Carlo.
Yes. Andrea Bollino, Professor of Economics. To Professor Knittel, about the fooling of the issue of the fooling, which is very intriguing and very interesting. How do you reconcile your view with the problem of the time inconsistency? Because sometimes fooling the public is benevolent in the first period, you know, if you get a better result in the second one. And that's something that we economists, I think, haven't solved in every field, and especially in yours.
Yeah, I understand the point that sometimes fooling people can be welfare enhancing. I just think we as a profession need to be up. If that's what we believe, then we should be upfront with it. I always have, myself and a frequent co-author of mine, we always talk about the New York Times test. If what you're saying right now was a headline in the New York Times, would you feel comfortable with that, right? And so would we as a profession feel comfortable with the New York Times headline saying, we're going to fool voters, but trust us, it's welfare enhancing? I don't know. I understand that our models could say it is, and I'm a card-carrying member of economics, and I understand that, but again, I think we should just be upfront with that as our view.
Thank you. We have more questions from the audience?
Mark Jackert again. I wasn't going to ask a question, but since nobody else got up. I mean, so Chris, as I say, I think you and I would really agree on a lot of stuff, and even the answer you just gave. And that's why in this British Columbia quasi-experiment that I'm talking about, so there was the experiment, which is the real world, we implemented these policies. Then we surveyed people and to find out what they knew about the policies, and very few knew much about them, but they knew about the carbon tax. Then we described the policies. So here's the low carbon fuel standards you now have, and here's the clean electricity standard. It's like a renewable portfolio standard, but allows more than just renewables. And here's the carbon tax, describe them. now tell us how strong or support. Then we gave them the marginal cost numbers because we had all of that too. And I could show them that the clean electricity standard was probably a marginal cost, I had in there $110 per ton, whereas the carbon tax, while it was heading towards $30, I was giving average, its average cost was $5. We gave them that information totally up front, and I'm just pointing out that the survey respondents then were one more time allowed to pick what they wanted, and they still gave about the same outcome. They didn't want that carbon tax, like this strong opposition. So it was just an interesting issue, not my area of expertise, but was why I just found that really interesting, that we have to be careful not to think that the rational model that you and I live in with our students in our class is how the world that the politician is living in. Just give you a chance to fire back on that.
I think that's fascinating, and I love seeing more and more of that sort of research. I guess if I were to follow up, the question I would have wanted to ask them, and maybe you did ask them, is who's paying this cost?
Oh, you said you're paying the cost.
That they're paying $110 a ton versus $30 a ton?
We equated it into the electricity price.
That's great. I guess we can fool them then, right?
We told them the truth, so we didn't fool them, and then they expressed their preference.
Well, but I put it another way. I'd like to probe them more. Why were they willing to pay $110 instead of $30? I think we as a profession need to understand that, and then that can certainly help us think about what the utility functions of these customers are. I can tell you, if I was at a gas station and I said, here's a gallon of gasoline, you could pay $100 or $3, and here's another one you could pay $2, I bet you 100% of people would pay $2, right? So in many instances in our life, customers pay the cheapest for equivalent utility. So I think we should do more research as to understand why they're willing to pay more in this context.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yeah.
This is more of a possible response to why would people still, when educated to the cost, why would they? I tried to convince my non-college educated nephew one time about the benefits of a gasoline tax. And and I said, we're going to raise the gasoline tax, and then you won't have to pay the deduction for your Social Security tax. I was trying to create a trade-off for him, and what he said was, well, will you guarantee me that the gasoline tax won't go up? You know, so I think that maybe the question is, people look at a policy and they say, I see what the policy is, and if the policy stays, I can see the policy stays the same. But if I agree to a tax, it's $10 now, it's going to be $20, it'll be $30, $40, $50, $60, it'll be $100, and I don't want to agree to something that I don't know where the end point is. Maybe that's the issue. So if you could convince the public that the tax won't go up, the same thing might be true for reallocation. You were talking about the reallocation. Can you actually convince people that the taxes collected will be reallocated in a way that will be favorable to them rather than to the rich? So that's maybe why the opposition occurs.
I totally agree. I think that's related to my first point about the need for credible policy in this arena. And I think another issue that's slightly different from what you raised when it comes to carbon taxes or gas taxes is, do I really believe the government's going to do what they say with the revenue? Not even is it going to go up, but they say they're going to fix roads. Do I really believe they're going to fix roads? And often they don't, right? And that's why, again, not being a political scientist, but that's why I could see tax and dividend plans being more politically feasible, if you will, than I think the first best world that we live in is you would tax carbon and use those revenues to reduce income taxes, other distortionary taxes. So you'd get this triple win. But I could certainly see where the population's not going to trust that policymakers will do that. And correctly so, probably, right? So that's where I think the tax and dividend plans do have this key advantage. If you take, for example, Secretary Schultz's plan where the money never even goes into DC, it stays in a fund that's outside of DC and it never gets touched by DC. I think that has some political benefits.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions, maybe 3.
Hi, Stephanie Wolf from Germany, a PhD student, and I really like the concept of this energy transition organization you talked about, because I got very frustrated lately in Germany. I went to a big conference in Berlin where also the traffic minister was speaking, and we advise the policymakers, the politicians, but it's never implemented. So I really like the institution of tech. But how does it work? You're your own institution, you can implement the measures, but is it the traffic minister or the economic minister, or who are you talking to, or how does it work? Thank you.
I report directly to the Minister of Energy. The master plan is a collective effort. So there are some measures there which are under the responsibility, for example, of the Department of Transportation, which will be your equivalent of the traffic department. And they have to implement their measures, measure them, and report through the master plan. So they will have at some point on a yearly basis starting next year to provide me with their information, and I'm the guardian of reporting back to the government and demonstrate that the money is well spent and we are achieving different goals. And it's important also for the government at some point, because we're not the politicians. It will be important for the government at some point to look at the different programs, how much they cost, how much they produce in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, and then make their decision. Are we continuing with this one, or are we continuing with that one? And this is what mostly citizens are complaining about and asking for. Show us first where the money goes. Is it well spent? And if not, what are you going to do about it? So accountability becomes key, because this is what we hear everywhere. What do you do with the money? And people are not necessarily against paying more. They just want to know that what they pay for, they got something out of it. And transparency, for me, it's key if we want to build that kind of partnership with our citizens. Otherwise, we will go nowhere, regardless. And you have something similar to us, because I was myself at the Transition Dialogue in Berlin not too long ago. It's DINA. And we look at their program. They are similar to us also. We are smaller. But worldwide, there are many organizations now like us who have the mandate to making sure that we achieve the transition.
Do we have more questions? You had one point?
If there is no question from the floor, I have one comment and questions.
Please.
Yeah. You just ask, maybe there's someone still have a question from the floor. If there's no, then I will use the opportunity to ask one question myself.
Yeah, I think there's a queue, so please go ahead, Johanne.
Hi, my name is Bjarne Steffen with MIT and DTH Zurich. So Chris, I have a question for you to this puzzle that's there seems to be between your aspiration for the profession and what the experiments show. Because what I learned a couple of times from political scientists is the reason for this puzzle that we have is that there's instrument constituencies. So there seems to be a preference among, let's say, the left that we don't want a cap and trade, and it's markets who brought us into the mess, so they can't get us out. And on the other side, that's what I learned in the US is you don't even talk about taxes with a lot of people, right? It's just the instrument which blows them off. And then if you look in detail at many of these instruments, like an RPS, carbon tax, cap and trade, it's not so binary. Either you have an RPS or you have a tax, but you could design a tax which almost works like an RPS, and you could design an RPS which almost is like other instruments. So could that be something for economists, for us, to find ways how to design instruments within this instrument type that seems to have a majority in a certain country to make the job that we want to make it do?
Yeah, I think so. So, you know, I often, when I talk with policymakers, I try to get a handle on what they're trying to maximize or minimize. Like, what do they care about? Whether it's, I care about the commuters in Western Massachusetts or the farmers in Western Massachusetts versus the people in the city. I think that's important. And certainly, again, I think carbon taxes provide more flexibility to tailor the tax in a way that captures what they're caring about. In many of these second and third best policies, they're not generating revenue, so you're sort of at the mercy of what they're doing. So I think that's an important part of what we do, is listening to policymakers and trying to understand to put it in our own language, their utility function, and to try to adopt or design policies that work with their utility function in a way that maximizes welfare. I do want to push back a little bit about this idea that the right pushes against carbon taxes, the right's pushing against climate change policy, right? It was the right who designed cap and trade programs. So my colleague, Dick Schmalensee, worked with the Bush senior administration to design the sulfur and NOx cap and trade programs. And for 3 decades, they were hailed by Republicans as the market way to reduce pollution. It's not that they're against carbon taxes or cap and trade. They're against climate change policy, right? And they're just using that tax as a way to fight any climate change policy. So once we get a more reasonable right, and one that admits that climate change is real, I actually don't think they'll fight against cap and trade or carbon tax. And in fact, again, Schultz's plan is the prototypical Republican way to reduce pollution. We're going to replace CAFE standards and the Clean Energy Plan. We're going to replace all these inefficient policies with the price on carbon. He's just a Republican that admits climate change is real, right? Once we get past that hurdle, I don't think there'll be as much resistance to pricing carbon as we think there will be.
Okay, thank you very much. I think our time is up.
I'd like to take this opportunity to have 2 general comments about the discussion regarding this policy instrument and also interaction with instrument. Because flow is you have the carbon tax and you have revenues, whether they can recycling, which is trying to have benefit. And here I would say that when you have environmental tax like carbon tax, on the one hand, you raise revenue, this is a positive thing. But on the other hand, once you impose carbon tax, which will have interaction among the tax, this generally is negative. So this really, to the society, whether this will be positive or negative will be dependent on these tools. And for the US per se, I wouldn't think Social Security is most distortions. So that reason, I would think that it's best to recycling tax revenue to replace Social Security. Although that was probably the best political self-narrative, but I wouldn't think that would go. This is my first comment. Second comment, and this morning, first speaker and also Chris also discussed is so-called this interaction among the instruments. And in the morning time, in the EU, we have the emission tradings. And on the one hand, they also have the renewable target. They also have energy efficient target. So you end up with 3 goals, 20, 20, 20. And then the question is, if you have renewable goal, you have energy efficient goals, end up that is less fossil fuel used, then is less emission emitted, then you have the less allowance price. In the end, this might be not what the emission trading system want to, why they were established. So if we take this interaction as an example, Then back to the US cases, and like Chris stressed in the California, on the one hand, or similar in the morning time, the first speaker talked about, we have these two instruments. On the one hand, we have the low fossil standard. On the one hand, we have this carbon trading or carbon tax. You end up with this, if you, in the British Columbia, you have the carbon tax in California, you have emission tradings, you end up with very low price. But on the other hand, you have the fossil fuels, low fossil percent, you end up price so high. So that case is really means, this kind of interactions. And I would think, so this is a research question whether we should have this tool, because this is really back to the EU cases. Because EU, later on, we have this debate, said why we have renewable target, why we have energy target, because they said they have multiple goals. And this energy and renewable, they said they want to achieve the energy securities. But in the US cases, and for this low fossil fuel standards, I don't know what is the main purpose, to have this goals. So yeah, that was my general comments, and end up with a very high different price.
So I know we're running short on time, but just 30 seconds. So I was involved with the design of the low carbon fuel standard within California. So I worked a lot with Dan Sperling, who's on the Air Resource Board and so on. So Dan and we were colleagues for a while, and we fight a lot over the low carbon fuel standard. He has an internally consistent view, which is that the low carbon fuel standard is also trying to fix another market failure. So there's the market failure associated with greenhouse gases, but in his mind, there's market failures associated with innovation as well, right? And so when you have two market failures, you should have two instruments in an ideal world. So that's the short answer. I think you could push back on how good the low carbon fuel standard is at innovation, but that would be the argument.
Thank you very much. I would like you to give a hand to all our panelists.